So let's start with this presentation. This cross-pollination of data science ideas across geography is a very weird title for some of you, especially with this word right here, cross-pollination. But okay, thank you. Now I think everyone can see me. Oh, really great, nice. So as I was telling you before, it's a very weird title, but the most important thing that we need to know in this point is that cross-pollination is basically this action of sharing ideas and knowledge for mutual enrichment, and that's something that we actively do here in Nubank. But first, we need to understand more or less like the evolution or the context and evolution of Nubank. The first thing is that as something that may some of you know, Nubank was born in Brazil in 2013, and then we started operations in Mexico in 2019, and finally we arrived to Colombia in 2020. So as you can see, we have like this gap of more or less 7 years between like the creation of Nubank and the last arrival to a geography. And that basically means that in each country, we have different levels of stage development. And that's something very important. And that's one of the reasons why this cross-pollination process is very actively here in Nubank. So there are some advantages and disadvantages of every single approach. But first, we need to I need to explain something. When we are talking about cross-pollination or sharing this idea, we need to make this decision about doing everything from scratch or try to take as much as possible of last developments. And of course, we need to find this right balance right here. And as you can see, we have like different these advantages and disadvantages for every single approach. So one of the things that we do as we start a project is basically try to answer this question. Just to show you more or less some examples of how this could work to us, I'm going to present, or we are going to present basically not only one case, but 3 cases in which we are going to talk about what was like our approach in terms of this sharing ideas and knowledge, and also what are the factors that we consider to take that approach, basically. These 3 cases are going to be like 3 of our models. I'm going to start with the models, with one model from Colombia, of course, and is Betty. Betty is basically this acquisition, Colombian credit acquisition model. What basically a acquisition credit model does is try to allow us to take the best decisions in terms of what kind of prospect we want to approve or don't, based of course on certain features that we have. So this is a very traditional, I think, model. So one of the particular things that we have here with Betty is that Betty is the youngest credit acquisition model that we have in Nubank, which means that we have potentially a lot of lessons to learn from Brazil and Mexico to take into account every time that we want to start like a new version of it. So our approach here in Colombia was to try to be smart, efficient as much as we can. That means that in one hand, we try to take advantage, of course, of the solution to common problems. For this kind of models, we're going to see that there are common problems. It doesn't matter the geography, or it doesn't matter the country. The problems are going to be like common in every single place. On the other hand, according to the context, try to create from scratch. So let's try to see how this works. I'm going to start to show you some examples of decisions that we could take in every single approach. So let's start with the approach of use past developments. And for example, we could use the same deployment framework. We could also use most of the validation metrics and procedures. And we could also use from past developments the same mitigation bias fix. And the reasons to do that could be that, for example, especially if we take into account like the stage of the development of each country, maybe we want to have like a fast development in order to have like this accelerate learning rate. And another thing, it would be like as I mentioned before, we share certain things if we want to build this kind of model, and it doesn't matter the country where we are at. So one of the things could be like common objectives, especially in the validation stage, and also common biases, or at least common baseline biases in terms of selection bias and things like that. So there are like these, so we have here these examples. Now I'm going to show you some examples when using the other approach that is basically creating things from scratch. For this approach, we could have, for example, we could personalize the future engineering process. We could personalize also the future selection, and maybe we could do that like over certain iterations. And also we could personalize experiments designs. The reasons why we can consider to do that are basically the following. So we could start to think about, hey, we really need to be able to have a model that adapts very, very well to local market conditions, and especially to the stage of the business. Another thing is that in every single country, we have different data providers. And that means that we need to have like different optimization of procedures to that kind of particular data. And another reason is basically the growth of the DS team. If we have enough numbers of data scientists in our team, then we have this available opportunity, learning opportunity to innovate in approaches. And that's like the other side of the coin. So one of the things, or in this process of building Betty, and in general, having this cross-pollination process in Nubank, we have learned some things, especially in this side of Nu Colombia. The first thing is that here in Nubank, we have this model approval process in which we really have the participation of more experienced data scientists from other geographies. And that's a very valuable thing to have, because like their opinion allows us to not to make the same mistakes, and also to really focus on the things that really matter. Another thing is that whenever we decide like to implement some solution from another country, we really need to not underestimate the differences between or across different markets, because if we underestimate this kind of heterogeneity, we ended up having like a suboptimal solution, and that's something that we really don't want. And the third thing is basically some generic thing you might think, but it's important. Always ask before jumping to the code. This is important because like maybe the idea that you currently have is an idea that some other data scientists had in the past in another geography. So it could be helpful to talk about this idea with the other person. The other thing is like taking into account all the slides that I have been presenting and all the examples and approaches. I'm going to, this is the last part of my presentation at least, and I'm going to show you some of the results that we have in this Colombian data science team. One thing that is important to highlight is that this team is very young. We are at least 1 year and 3 months old. So we have seen like the first thing is that we have seen this huge growth of the team versus the situation that we have the last year. And that's very important if we want to innovate, especially. But in terms of Betty, let's talk about Betty. With the Betty model, we could double the approval rate with a constant risk rate, which is awesome for a company like Nubank. And of course, this implies that we have this highly significant improvement of the performance versus baseline policies. And that's also awesome from the data science team point of view. As I promised you, we have like different cases. Now we are going to show you the second model. Is basically called Aldebaran, and this part is going to be presented by Hector.
Thanks, Hamadys. So hi, everyone. My name is Hector. I'm going to start describing myself. So I am a white male with light colored eyes. I have a purple background. I have this purple background that all of the presenters also have. You can see me from my chest up, and I'm wearing a military green t-shirt. So basically, I'm going to talk to you about a project that we recently launched in Mexico. It's called Aldebaran. We have this tradition of naming our models, and specifically for this team, we basically name models after Knights of the Zodiac. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of the model. This model is intended to predict basically spending behavior. So what we want to do is to say which customers will actually spend a little bit more if we increase their credit lines, so that we can actually increase their lines. This is a new type of model that has been developed in Nu, and by new I mean it is not. We have been working, for example, with credit risk models for quite some time. However, with spending elasticity models, we have been working with these models at I don't know, maybe less less than a year. So you can see in this chart where we're trying to basically predict this behavior from each customer, where we try to predict the spend given a credit line, so that we can determine, first of all, what is going to be the spending levels, right? And then we just take the decision that optimizes business metrics. In the next slide, right now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the development cycle, because this is a story where we actually halfway through the development of the project, we try to innovate things, and we basically found a way of changing things, of changing how we basically wanted to model spending elasticity. So first of all, we started by already having an approach that was already implemented in Brazil. So we, as Hamadys also mentioned, we basically had to take the decision of whether we should just grab what has already been done and just implement that, or implement a whole new different approach. So basically, one thing that we started doing, and I think this is really important, and I'm going to detail a little bit more on these specific 3 points, because after we heard that in Brazil they had implemented a better solution to predict spending, we basically took all of the documentation that the folks in Brazil already did, all of the recorded presentations and slides, and also we also took a deep dive into the discussions that have been happening in Slack. For example, we basically use Slack for messaging. And what we ended up seeing is that, okay, so we already had this approach that we knew it worked. So we basically started imitating what Brazil had already done. So these were our first approaches for this model. However, halfway through the development, we started wondering, hey, what if we innovate in some kind of ways? What if we change what the model output actually what the model actually outputs? Basically, how are the inputs used to model spending elasticity? So in this moment, we basically just stopped and analyzed the trade-offs between what were the pros and the cons of doing an approach like this. So in the next slide, I just listed the points that basically we were considering for whether or not to innovate halfway through or not, right? So on the good side, we we basically came up with an idea that allowed us to leverage faster the actual outputs of the model, and also to use them in a faster way for our decision-making process. So in the end, it was a simpler model in some sense. Obviously, the performance could have been better with the approach that Brazil had. However, we saw that we had a dramatic and a really quick improvement against the existing approach. So I think these 2 points are the 2 main points why we decided to take on the new approach. And so some other considerations and some good points that we're taking into consideration were that our new approach, because it was a simpler approach, it also had a higher interpretability. So in the end, it's also an objective for us to understand how our models work and how we are taking decisions based on our models. We don't just blindly trust our predictive models. So this was also a good point against against using this new approach. And on the bad side, well, we basically lost the not all of the past learnings, but some of the past learnings that had already been applied to the previous approach, or to the approach that Brazil already had. So most of the things weren't applicable for our case. Most of the validations, most of the code that had already been developed, it wasn't applicable for our case, because we basically changed the way that our model outputs a prediction. So in the end, we obviously had to develop all of these new approaches to validate our model, right? And we had to basically deal with this new architecture. And also because the approach that we that we innovated was a neural network, for example. This was something that was really different to what the Brazilian. This was basically the main difference than what the Brazilian approach was. So we basically had to deal with also new challenges in terms of deploying this model, right? Because we hadn't deployed a model that was similar to Aldebaran. So in the end, one thing that we did do is actually take the decision of using this new approach, because it already brought really quick gains across the in our decision making. So basically, like the thing is that this wasn't, and this is like the main point that I want to go over. If we could go to the next slide, please. The main point that I want to make here is that this project couldn't have been possible, or it couldn't have been developed as quickly as it was developed if we didn't already had some documentation, or we didn't have some slides that were shared from Brazil, from the Brazilian team to us, because in the end, because this was a new type of model, there was a lot to study, and there was a lot to understand before actually deploying, starting to develop the model. So basically, we used these 3 main channels to inform ourselves and to study how we could make this approach possible. However, I would just like to mention that in the end, we do have a system here in Nu where we basically make sure and guarantee that all of the learnings that we have do not just stay in a project and just become something like that is only known for a specific team. What we basically end up doing as well, it was also creating documentation and also recording presentations, or even present the new architecture, and maybe even challenge the approaches that were already in existence. And in the end, what we ended up having is an architecture that other teams could also use. But however, this couldn't be possible if we didn't do the right documentation, for example, efforts, or if we didn't make the effort of presenting this to a larger audience as well, and also engaging in discussions and messages in our communication platforms, for example. So if we can go to the next slide. In the next slide, I'm just going to conclude my story here by saying what were the actual gains of doing something like this. And in the end, like what we ended up gaining was we basically gained a new testable and promising model architecture to basically use in other contexts, more than only credit decisions, for example. Also, we basically explored new ways and also we engaged in a lot of discussions regarding elasticity models, and because this is a really new concept well, not a really new, but it's a new concept for us. There is still a lot to learn. So even just looking at problems from another perspective could also add a lot of knowledge and a lot of discussion to the whole team. And also one thing that was not the main objective of the project, but we also started seeing like an increased an increased flow of communication, and I mean, in that increased flow of communication, what we saw is also that the direction of the communication, because it first started from Brazilians communicating to us how were the models developed and how were the models validated. However, that communication flow also started changing the direction, and then we started communicating as well, like this new way of approaching this problem. So in the end, it was a project, or yeah, it is a project that also added a lot to the communication. And basically, well, the final impact of the model is that we, given this model, we are able to make better credit decisions. We are better able to detect which customers are going to, we're able to detect how customers will spend given a credit line, and then we can make more accurate decisions and also to optimize key business metrics. So basically, that's the story of Aldebaran, and I'm going to please ask Gabriel to tell his story.
Hey everyone, how are you? I am Gabriel Ferreira. I am a data science manager here at Nu. I'll describe myself. So I'm a white male wearing a blue t-shirt and glasses, and I have short light brown hair. Okay, so as I said, I am a data science manager here at Nu, working for the Customer Excellence Mexico team. So it's basically the team that takes care of the customer service. And in my position as a data science manager, I am super close to the models that power these tools here in Mexico. So I'm gonna tell a story about how we are standardizing these models here and also in Colombia. So if you can go to the next one. So just before we go into some details, it's good to share some context about how the customer service systems work. So basically, every time we launch Nu in a new country, we have to implement some customer service systems like ticket routing for chat, email, and phone. This basically enables us to send the tickets that we get, so the phone calls, the chats, and the emails, to the correct teams so they can answer customer questions. So this is one thing we need to have. And the other thing we always want to have as well is automatic replies for chat and email, so that we can solve the most simple customer questions in a smart and efficient way, and also in a fast way, so the customers can get their answers sooner. So most of these systems, they are powered by machine learning models, but there are some challenges because it's not straightforward to reuse these models created in one country. It's not easy to directly reuse them in other countries. So there are obvious differences in languages. So for instance, Portuguese in Brazil and Spanish in the other two countries, Mexico and Colombia. But even among the Spanish-speaking countries, there are some challenges, like we cannot share the data across countries due to regulations. There is also difference in word usage, expressions, and so on. And there's also differences across the countries in the stage of operations. Hamadys was mentioning this some minutes ago. So basically, there are different products available. There can be big differences in customer base size and other differences. So here we saw an opportunity for standardizing these models, these customer service models. So after we built our first customer support model in Mexico, the chat routing model, we saw that Colombia was having a very similar use case. So basically, they wanted to build a model that would do basically the same thing as the model we just built. And then we saw an opportunity there to standardize this process. And we started this in this first stage, collaborating between Mexico and Colombia, because there were a lot of similarities. So these countries, they share the same language. They are more or less in similar stage of operations, especially when we compare with Brazil, and the products available are the same. So we are also collaborating with Brazil in other fronts, which could be topic for other talk. But for this one, we'll focus on this collaboration between Mexico and Colombia. So can we go to the next one? Yeah. So the solution we came up with basically to solve this problem of standardizing the models was to abstract the model code to a common library. So we created a library, and the requirements for that were, we wanted this solution to be shared across different models and countries. We wanted it to be plug and play, so we could use the current infrastructure we have and also the current framework, so that we didn't have like to build everything from scratch, but use the tools we already had at Nubank to deploy the models. And last, we wanted it to be a library that allowed us to define the models in a declarative way, so that it would be very simple to create a model. So if you go to the next slide, you see here how the library fits in our current architecture. So we have here in purple the library. It's called Common Text Models. And you have basically to just give it a declarative config, and it will generate all the inputs that our current machine learning framework needs to train a model and generate all the artifacts that are necessary to put this model in production and make predictions. Okay. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to see like a very small example of how we are declaring these models. So it is as simple as that, to declare a new model. And this is very good because it allows teams to start testing things much sooner in customer support, so they can very easily train a new model. So here you are basically saying how you want to split your data, what are going to be the columns used for the features and the target, and what is the algorithm you're going to use for your model. So if you go to the next slide, just talking before we wrap up about the results and lessons learned from this approach we are taking. So currently we have 4 different models using the library in Mexico and Colombia. And a fun fact is that all of them, they share, the names are dishes in Mexico and Colombia. So we are following that path for the names. They basically all share the same code, and the differences are only in the configuration and the data used. Okay. And this allowed us to significantly decrease the time to market, so the time it took us to launch the model. And we also are finding that this approach is less prone to bugs and errors, because all the sensitive code is in the library and it's reviewed. It has a bunch of unit tests, and it's maintained by a bigger team. And also, we are being able to significantly reduce code duplication. So you can see here on the right side, I took this screenshot just today. This is a pull request we have open in GitHub that is basically migrating one model to use the library, and it feels super good. It's basically removing 2,000 lines of code from the repo, and we know how hard that is and how good it feels. And the next steps, we basically want to deliver more models in different countries using this strategy, and incorporate more capabilities into the library, because right now it supports only some basic algorithms that probably don't support all the use cases we have, but we want to expand that, and also work on some opportunities we have on the training data set generation part. That's it from my side. I think now we are going back with Irene.